Hello everyone, welcome to GGN. Today is Tuesday, November 13th, 2012, and I'm Darko. This is the first article I have for you. It's covering the Middle East, or the Gulf states, Qatar, depending on how you pronounce it, I guess. But it's not going to be, big conspiracy theory or anything really crazy in these news reports today. But I'm going to try to tie it together because Qatar's been in the news recently. I've covered them for two separate occasions. The first one was the escalation of the regime change in Syria, and they were at the head of it, trying to get other countries involved, but they were the ones with the cash and the weapons, and everybody knows that they were in the beginning of this whole thing with Syria. But also, they were trying to form a Gulf Cooperation Council that was stronger and integrated, Sunni-based, and so they're trying to maintain the kingdom in Bahrain, basically the dictatorships out there as well. And then I came across this article, an expose, Qatar buyout and takeover of Europe. So from StratRisk, the editors say, read this carefully. It is shocking and factual description of the situation at present, but it also is a prophecy of the future for Europe, or should we already call it Eurabia. Hamas leader maintains a residence in Qatar while the Taliban opened their first representation in a foreign country in its capital, Doha. So it says a hateful wind emanating from the small Islamic emirate is now blowing towards Europe. A wind accompanied by ocean of poisonous, oily, bloody money, all coming from the peninsula in the Persian Gulf, which today is the world's richest country. Slowly, Qatar is buying Europe's assets. It's not Qatar is not exactly, or even the slightest bit, French-speaking. It's just joined the International Organization of La Francophonie as an associate member. Its goal is clear: to change and manipulate French culture. The first example is Voltaire's school in Doha banned a religious book that discussed Christianity in the Middle Ages. Qatari Emir Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa Thani, who has cultivated the image of the pro-Western reformist, vowed to spare no effort to spread the teachings of Wahhabi Islam across the whole world. Last December, Qatari Emir inaugurated the Ayman Muhammad Wahhab Mosque in Doha, dedicated to the founder of the most virulent, anti-Jewish and totalitarian Islamic school of religion. So Qatar's octopus is working on three fronts: overthrowing despotic Arab regimes, i.e. Syria or Libya, and replace these with Sharia-based countries, like I said, Sunni-based, destroying Israel by financing the terror groups. The Emir just visited Gaza, and Islamicizing the European continent through mosque and investments. In Germany, the country's sovereign fund, Qatar Investment Authority, owns 17% of Volkswagen, 10% of Porsche, and 9% of construction giant Hochtief. In Italy, says that one known firm, Qatar, just bought Valentino's fashion-style company. AC Milan owner Silvio Berlusconi is also ready to sell the powerhouse to the ruling emir of the state of Qatar. In the UK, Qatari Muslims own swaths of Canary Wharf Financial District in London. They also own 20% of the London Stock Exchange. They financed 95% of the Shard Tower in London, the highest skyscraper in Europe. Last February, they announced, when Sarkozy was still president in France, that it was willing to spend $65 million in the French banlieues, the suburbs home to a vast majority of 6 million Muslims. Also, they doubled the sum to $100 million. They called it the Qatari takeover of the banlieues. They're also in Switzerland buying up places out there. Cannes, a film festival, big hotel to host all the big celebrities. In Spain, they funneled donations to this Islamic League, basically linked to Muslim Brotherhood in Syria, which controls the Islamic Cultural Center. They paid about $500,000 to renovate the center, based in Barcelona. And in Italy, the Qatari Emir is financing the construction of many mega mosques. While in Ireland, they recently donated almost €1 million to build a mega mosque in Cork. What is also interesting here that I'm finding is that they're saying that Qatar is a bastion of anti-Semitism, which goes around the world along with the investments. They're hosting many conferences which demonize Jews. Alright, so now I'm ready to move on there. Sorry if I went through that too long, but I just want to get it out of the way. Gulf states recognize new Syrian opposition group. The six-nation Gulf Cooperation Council I was talking about recognized a new broad-based Syrian opposition group, Monday as legitimate representatives of the Syrian people. So it goes on here and it says that the Syrian anti-government groups, the anti-government groups are terrorists and mercenaries hired by the West and this Gulf Cooperation Council. They said that the Syrian anti-government terrorists struck a deal Sunday after more than a week of meetings in Qatar, who's mostly funding it. Like I said, that's why they're doing it there. Excuse is to realize the aspirations and hopes of the Syrian people. That's what they're endorsing. Well, it's not for the Syrian people. And the GCC is made up of Kuwait, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Oman, and the UAE. Right now in Bahrain and Kuwait, they're actually having some instability. And that's what that article I was talking about covered, especially with Bahrain, talking about how they're going to suppress these protests. So far, they've banned protests. I've actually heard about somebody getting shot at one of the protests recently in Bahrain. Syrian opposition hypes unity agreement, but many groups not represented. So it says that they seek international recognition. Well, they got it from the Gulf states. So it says here the Syrian National Council has long claimed to be true leadership of the Syrian rebellion. Now there's another umbrella group over them, dubbed the Syrian National Coalition for Opposition and Revolutionary Forces. So KORF. The faction made up of the Syrian National Council and some other exile groups now claims to have successfully unified the entire opposition. So they're doing just like what Qatar was saying, right? They want to be representative of the Syrians. It seems the group is putting the cart before the horse, announcing itself as the representatives and ruler of all, and then assuming that they will be able to count on their support by virtue of their own declaration. A leading Damascus cleric who fled Syria has been chosen at a meeting in Qatar to head the new coalition of terrorists that's trying to bring down Assad's government. It says here he's a former Sunni Muslim imam in this mosque in Damascus. He is seen as a moderate. Newly formed Syrian opposition bloc calls for specialized weapons. So it's interesting that they call him a moderate because he's going to be heading up a bunch of extremists that want to impose Sharia law. The leader of the newly formed Syrian opposition bloc, known as the National Coalition, has called on the world powers to arm insurgents with specialized weapons. We need these specialized weapons. He also urged the EU to recognize their group and provide them with financial support. It says here the EU and the US have also declared support for the opposition bloc but fell short of recognizing it. Remember before France, like a month or two ago, was telling the opposition to form their own government, form a new government. On Tuesday, French foreign minister urged world powers to recognize the newly formed, basically puppet regime. British troops may be flown to Syria, head of armed forces admits. British troops could be sent to Syria in the event of a major humanitarian crisis. Oh, there's going to be a humanitarian crisis. The head of the armed forces has admitted, so they're going to try to get as many civilians dead and killed and put it in the mainstream media and say it's a humanitarian crisis, but they don't want it to stop at the same time, right? They want the body counts to increase and escalate so that the leader of a sovereign nation known as Syria and Assad will step down voluntarily. Well, he just said recently in a rare thing, I will what? I will live and die in Syria, and I'm not a puppet of the West. So any intervention would be limited and needed the support of the people inside Syria. So the General Sir David Richards said plans are being drawn up in case winter made conditions on the ground worse. It will. They know that. A lot of refugees are going to be cold, freeze, and starve. It would be seen as a potential step towards a full-scale military intervention. Well, it's already an invasion, but that's what they're talking about. A full-scale military intervention bringing British forces directly into contact or conflict with the regime of Assad. They don't like doing that. They like to just do it covertly, hiring their own enemies, which are usually these terrorists and Muslim extremists, to take out these regimes or other sovereign governments that are not, basically, they're not pro-Zionist. They're pro-Palestinian, I guess you could say. Britain's training rebels to assassinate the Syrian president, says a report. British Prime Minister Cameron prepares to use the Royal Air Force in Syria to put an end to the massacre. Like I said, they don't want that. The Syrian regime is committing throughout the country. Well, most of them are done by the same troops that they're supporting and going to train as assassins. British special forces are training rebels and terrorists to assassinate the Syrian president and his commanders. Real nice, isn't it? It says, unlike previous position of the U.S. and Western countries not to arm the Syrian rebels, U.S. CEO President Barack Obama and Cameron are considering to intervene in Syria and to enforce a no-fly zone. Yeah, that's right. The RAF is set for a Syria no-fly operation. So it says here the Prime Minister is preparing to use the RAF to enforce no-fly zones across Assad's, basically, they go in there. God, what a loaded article, man. They taught me in journalism about this first paragraph is the most important one, where you're supposed to put it all in there. They call it a pyramid structure. And, man, they just completely, it's just completely loaded. Look at this. Across President Assad's trouble-torn country in a bid to stop mass slaughter, right? So completely loaded. The readers who don't know better, don't have, critical thinking skills, don't see the bigger picture. They just buy that hook, line, and sinker. Then a man's arrested at a British airport on suspicion of Syria terrorism links. Police are investigating alleged terrorism linked to Syria arrest 24-year-old man arriving on a flight from Bahrain. That's so, you know why this article is funny, of course, right? They're investigating individuals traveling to Syria in support of alleged terrorist activity. Well, let's just see this again here. British troops may be flown to Syria ahead of armed forces admits, so they're going to help the terrorists. We already know that they're funding them. They're going to be training them as assassins, and yet when they get caught coming from Britain, then they got to say, oh, these are terrorists traveling to Syria. Well, they're actually supporting your mission. You're funding and training them. Again, that's how ridiculous this whole thing is, right? Because it's like there's Syrians and Lebanese and stuff like that, neighboring countries, that are saying, we're seeing a lot of unusual suspects out here, guys speaking British accents, screaming Ali Akbar, working with the rebels. So, I mean, it's just a lot, mostly foreigners, right? And they know that. Mortar rounds from Syria hit Israel-held Golan Heights, feeding fears of violence spilling over the border. Israel's military says 3 mortar rounds fired from Syria have landed inside the Israeli-held Golan Heights. It's the third time in less than a week that Syria's civil war has spilled over into the Golan Heights. So, like I said before, it's not really a civil war. It's mostly foreign mercenaries. It's an invasion of a sovereign nation. And I've covered this before about a month ago, where I could see it already happening with the Golan Heights. They were playing into the Brookings Institute report, which I'll be getting into probably in the next video here. This is all planned. This is not by this is not by accident. So just like Turkey, when the mortar shells, which are usually used by the rebels, not the army so much, flew into over the Turkish border and killed a few civilians, Turkey all of a sudden went on the offense, right? Started declaring basically war on Syria. So, but at the same time, right around the same time, Lebanese journalists caught them on video. Basically using journalists, kidnapping them, and also arming the rebels. Turkish government arming terrorists, known terrorists and Muslim extremists that are killing civilians and carrying out atrocities in Syria and other places. So now we have these, quote, mortar shells coming from the Syria government now flying over into Israel-held Golan Heights. Israel complains over Syrian tanks in the Golan Heights. After 3 Syrian tanks entered the disputed Golan Heights, Israel claims Tel Aviv says the presence of such vehicles in the demilitarized zone violates a long-standing ceasefire agreement between the two countries. And I remember seeing an article from Jerusalem Post in that saying, all the people in Israel, you got to help us. We're in bomb shelters. We're under attack from Gaza, rockets and stuff. Israel takes aim at Syria from Golan Heights. So this is all kind of what's happening. Israeli tanks struck a Syrian artillery launcher Monday after a stray mortar shell flew into Israel-held territory, the first direct clash between neighbors since the Syrian uprising began nearly 2 years ago. So Syria doesn't have anything to benefit from this. Like, what happened in Lebanon with the explosion that killed one of the leaders in that. They don't really benefit from this. Just like with the Turkish mortar shell, most of the Turks don't have any issues with Syria. They don't want to have any issues, just like Lebanon, just like Iraq. So these bastards, mostly the Zionists and the West, they need to create these situations to where there's all this crap going on the borders and it just spills over no matter what. So Israel fires at 2 Syrian mortar batteries and reports a direct hit. And this is where we will return in part 2. Western propagandists attempt to trigger catastrophic Turkish-Syrian war. So this is actually from October 6, 2012, when they were trying to create this buffer zone or no-fly zone, which a month later they're about to have. which will be enforced by British, U.S., French forces. Thank you.